Trying to examine Obscure's world thoroughly and dig deep into it had me quite surprised, since I remember the game being quite bland in adolescence, with no real substance. But after replaying it recently, I've become quite fond of the surface-level aspects of the game. Things like the level design, atmosphere, and narrative. But I've never quite managed to wrap my head around the stereotypical early 2000s wacky characters, especially in contrast with the game's dark and mature tone. Well, that was until I've went through a couple more of exhaustive playthroughs, where I've came to realize that there was more than meets the eye, and that there was a great sense of detail to be discovered. Things from minute character backgrounds to hidden lore scattered throughout the game's level design, all disguised as a B-horror flick from the 80s. So grab yourself a flashlight, as I'll be shedding it on the dark corners of Shannon's underskirt. This is Obscure. So, before jumping into the present events of the game with God knows what this is, I'll briefly establish two parties that are essential to the game's world, starting off chronologically with the foundation of the Delta Theta Gamma Brotherhood in 1805, a powerful organization with ties that lead to the president himself. Their base for existence revolves around the unchained practice of science. In other words, they don't give a shit about morality and ethics to achieve their goals. Now, of course, to achieve this height of unbound science, they interpret anything expendable, including human life, with their bigger picture being a better future for humanity. Their recruitment process relies heavily on students' brainpower, and in order to be able to reach that demographic, they infiltrate schools by disguising themselves as a quote-unquote fraternity. And so now, with the Brotherhood's history out of the way, let me skip forward by a century or so, specifically to 1895, where the Friedman twins, Leonard and Herbert Friedman, were taking a trip to Africa. Fueled by their shared interest in plants, the twins spent a lot of time collecting unknown plant specimens. However, during this specific trip, the twins discovered a plant with youth-restoring properties, and in hopes of figuring out a way to transfer the plant's anti-aging capabilities to the human body, they take this plant, known as mortiphilia, back to the States with them. Unfortunately, their attempts at gaining recognition for their work had failed, as their experiments were considered to be morally and spiritually controversial. Unsurprisingly, this is where the Delta Theta Gamma Brotherhood steps in, offering the twins a spot in the Brotherhood with full access to their labs, so they would be able to complete their research. Initially, the twins had declined the offer, since they wanted a direct admission for their work. But 1902 rolls around, and it's been 7 years since the twins had first discovered the mortiphilia plant, with no significant progress on their research. So they decide to use their remaining asset to build a school. This school is where the game will take place, which is why I'm jumping on to the present timeline, Leafmore High 2003.
Keep it down! Horny
I know what you're thinking.
This can't be the actual theme song.
Well, it isn't. That's because the original one is copyrighted. Although the 2014 Steam re-release of the game actually swaps the no longer licensed soundtrack. But I feel like the new one fails to set the rebellious and wacky tone of the game. Anyhow, this prologue cutscene gives a brief introduction to the main characters, and it does its job at portraying the surface-level characteristics of each individual. This sounds way deeper than it actually is. Okay, let me show you what I mean.
Hey, Josh, get out of our way.
Troubled jock with family issues.
But I've got to finish up my story on the basketball team for the
Shy nerd with a kind heart.
paper.
Yo, dog, Kenny, chill out, man. Leave him alone.
Lazy stoner with a laid-back personality. You know what I mean. So, after finishing up with this basketball practice session, everyone decides to head home. Everyone but the team's captain, Kenny. Kenny decides to hang around for a bit longer to shoot some hoops.
This motherfucker don't miss.
No, he's fucking good.
taking control over Kenny in what seems to be an ordinary high school gymnasium, but taking a closer look at the floor where it says 1960. It contradicts with the school's original foundation date, which is 1902. So something's had to happen to constitute the rebrand. Actually, there are some evidence that allude to the high school campus being a different institution originally. This is indicated by... Hold on, let me get this.
Hello?
Kenny, you were supposed to call. Did you forget about our date?
Ashley, no. You know me better than that. I just finished practice. Just a quick shower and I'll be right there.
Good. And don't be late this time. See you, baby.
Okay, I'll be right there. Hey, what the... Where's my bag?
Going after the bag thief leads Kenny to an abandoned house outside the school's premise. Deep in its shed is a huge basement that consists of tunnels and rooms built beneath the school, and it's where Kenny finds another student in a depraved state, locked behind a cell.
Hey, please, don't hurt me. Chill out, I'm not gonna hurt you.
The game introduces its two-player co-op mechanic and sends them both to the afterlife, as a grotesque creature barges in and seizes the duo's escape attempt, concluding the game's prologue. And I have to say that this interlude pacing is masterfully crafted, taking the suspense up a notch a little by little, starting with daytime surrounded by friends to nighttime alone, progressing through areas where each one feels sketchier than the last, tying it up with an epilogue that jump-starts the mystery surrounding the occurring events. Switching the scene to the morning after, to the introduction of the worst jiggle physics I've ever seen in a game.
Kenny didn't come home last night. You guys must have had a wild time.
Yeah, forget about Kenny. We need to get your breasts x-rayed.
Naturally, Kenny's girlfriend, Ashley, and his sister, Shannon, are both concerned since Kenny hasn't showed up from the night before. So, they decide to team up with Josh, a student journalist who sets a meeting in the school's cafeteria at 6 o'clock to investigate Kenny's disappearance. The arrangement takes place, but with the unfortunate circumstance of being locked up by the janitor, who's in my opinion is all in on whatever is about to go down, as I'll elaborate later on.
You've got a serious problem. What? Are you insane?
Interesting. Okay, so while running around the administration building, searching for clues in regards to Kenny's whereabouts, I've ran through different combination of character lineups, since each one has their own special ability, with some more useful than the others. But if anything, these so-called aptitudes do a better job of providing background profiles for the characters than actually being put to use. Sure, Kenny's sprint ability can come in handy in hard mode, and Ashley's special offensive attacks can rack up some damage, but as for the rest, I'm not even sure if these abilities even work. Case in point, Josh's ability as a filmmaker and a journalist is flushing out remaining objects in a room, where if an item remains unpicked, Josh would point it out by saying,
"There's something else to do here."
But later on in the game, during a major event where all the players' equipment are laid in a box, you'd almost be certain that Josh would point the box out. But I don't know. Let's take Josh's opinion on the matter.
There's nothing left for us here.
These motherfuckers can't do shit no more.
Although I love the fact that there are passive abilities that the game doesn't tell you about, like characters being able to push objects faster than the others depending on their body type, or just the variation between their default run speed, small attributes that make each one feel more individualized. So, progressing through the building and right into the girls' restroom, Josh gets traumatized by the sight of these toilets.
Nasty bitch.
So I've offered him a sick leave and replaced him with Shannon. Okay, this is the perfect segue to talk about the hidden depth behind the characters. Hold on, let me get the alternate costume to strengthen my point. Now, taking a look at this dumb bitch. Now, taking a look at Shannon, it's easy to assume that she's written as this pretty blonde girl who's not exactly bright. Bear in mind that this stereotypical profiling wasn't anything far-fetched back in 2003. But Shannon is in fact the exact opposite. as she is mature and intelligent, with such qualities passing on to her special ability, since she literally informs the player on what to do next.
I'm sure I saw an old projector somewhere in the school.
Her intellect is indicated through various notes scattered throughout the game, such as the teacher's notebook, which registers Shannon with an excellent rating and 0 days of absence, or by the school's newspaper, which announces her as the winner of Champion Genius Podcast. They could have used a more original name for this one. But going by the not judging a book by its cover approach, her provocative and rebellious choice of fashion is her way of looking older and more mature. It's some sort of a defense mechanism to downplay her brains, since it's not exactly quote-unquote cool to have one in a high school social setting, as it can be a bit intimidating. Anyways, scouting through the administration building while finding some clues and theories, I've headed for the attic where the group encounters this giant ball of a creature with a small pair of eyes and a mouthful of teeth. Its form resembles some sort of a mutated animal, to be more specific, a mutated frog. A biology teacher by the name of Mr. Walden rushes in and breaks the nearby window, revealing the creature's fatal weakness to direct sunlight. It also appears that Mr. Walden is struggling with an ailment of some sorts. But nonetheless, he unlocks the front door of the building and tells the students to get the hell out. So far, nothing substantial has been revealed, and the game's world is still in its infrastructure building phase, as it establishes the first hub area, the schoolyard. A desk, might want to check what's on it later on. So after the students regroup at the schoolyard, they head for the classrooms looking for the principal to see if he can offer any help. But instead we get Stan, who I've happened to connect with the most, although he does try to swindle me.
Stan, what are you doing here?
Nothing, dog. I'm just editing my notes. If you want, I can do the same for you for only $50.
Bruh, 50? That's like 80 with inflation, you high?
Whoa, dog. I don't know what you've been smoking, but you need to stop.
No, I'm asking you. Stan is the most unhinged crook, with a performance rating of mostly Fs, which he tries to illicitly forge and hustle people for it, selling unauthorized energy drinks. Hell, even his special ability is picking locks. But none of that takes away from his likability and charm, as his laid-back personality can calm everyone down in a stressful and heated situations. And although his character arc does not see any real evolution in the first game, he does return with more maturity and discipline after serving some jail time in the second game. But for now, I'll use his abilities to picklock this closet, where a newspaper can be found. This newspaper connects a lot of dots, so let me go into detail. You see, ever since the foundation of this school by Leonard and Herbert Friedman in 1902, there had been a lot of controversy over students disappearing, with most of the disappearances occurring at the school's dormitories. And so, the school's principal/founder, Herbert Friedman, takes it on himself to control the damage and potentially solve the problem by closing out the dormitories. And with the help of the police, he was able to do so. And surely enough, that seemed to work. Closing out the dormitories had put an end to the kidnappings. Well, for a while at least. But what's weird is, how come the police had never found the culprit, or even has the slightest clue on his identity and whereabouts? After all, one of the students who had gone missing was last seen in the sickbay after feeling unwell. How come the nurse hasn't got a clue as well? Is she in on it? And what about the authorities? How are they letting the school stay open for business? Especially with the double-digit number of cases. Could this all be a big conspiracy theory that renders everyone involved as a part of an alliance who are working together to carry out the kidnappings and cover them up? I mean, for such a theory to even have a place in reality, the people in question need to have ties that go all the way up to the president. But I'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So let me make a cup of coffee and get back to the classroom's building to resume the group's mission of finding the principal. While traversing the classroom's hallway, the group encounters a grotesque creature, but this one seems different from the ones we've seen before. While the first one seemed to have undergone mutations as an animal, this one resembles more of a humanoid transfiguration, revealing that there is levels to this shit. But what they all seem to have in common is weakness to light. The monsters emit black spores that only dissipate with a direct light beam. But by advancing to the next room in the building, a note can be found detailing a plant with those same exact properties. This plant is the Mortiphilia, which was discovered over a century ago by the Friedman brothers, who've also happened to have found this school. The connection is obviously there, but the timeline is not adding up since the Friedman brothers have discovered the Mortiphilia before they even have founded the school itself, and that was over 100 years ago. And what's fucked up is Herbert Friedman is the present-day principal of the school. That means he's about 144 years old. So it's either that the Friedman twins were able to find a way to extract an anti-aging serum from the Mortiphilia, or that Herbert could just have the world's greatest cardio.
This is ridiculous.
And so, to answer this, the group heads to the principal's office, where they find an old letter that was sent to Herbert, written by a woman named Elizabeth, and it says,
I wanted you to know that you were on my mind, and I was thinking about you as I was being so naughty.
Okay, that's not what the letter says. For starters, Elizabeth is actually Leonard's wife, so she is basically writing to her brother-in-law Herbert and asking him to stop her husband from testing the anti-aging serum on himself. But her attempt falls short, since it's revealed that after the twins had failed to gain recognition for their findings, one of them, Leonard, took the matter into his own hands and decided to inject himself with the serum to prove its life-regenerating capabilities. What happened to Leonard next on, well, at least according to the authorities, is that he lost control over his plane and died from crashing it near Long Island. Of course, this information is far from the truth, and it's heavily propagated by the Brotherhood to protect the experiment's secrecy. What have actually happened to Leonard is worse than his proclaimed death. But for now, the fact that Herbert is still alive and well at 144 years old indicates achieving some sort of a success with the serum. Sharing him with the same life-prolonging results is Elizabeth, as right next to her 100-years-old letter is a voicemail left by her, revealing her to be the school's nurse, Miss Wixon. A small detail that I love here is Elizabeth's accent does have a resemblance of how a person born in the 1800s would sound like.
Come quickly, I don't know what's going on, but I think it has something to do with the experiments. Oh no!
Well, kind of. Next stop is the library. So after trying to brute force this safe by using the code with the highest success rate in survival horror games and fail, I've happened to notice an oversight by the developers. Well, not exactly an oversight, but maybe a lack of detail. You see, these written lore notes that you find throughout the game contain a lot of information surrounding the events and the characters, but this information, more so than often, seems to predate the cutscenes information, and it creates a disconnect. Okay, that didn't sound very coherent. Let me put it this way. I'm playing as Ashley and Josh, right? And I found a note that contains top-secret information that easily convicts Herbert Friedman as the perpetrator of the whole monsters breakout situation, or at least acknowledges his direct involvement. But when Ashley and Josh get a hold of this information, they don't seem to get the memo and act as this information doesn't even exist. But you do as the player, where in the following cutscene, the duo come up to Herbert asking for his help, while they seem to be oblivious to his actions. On the other hand, you as the player know he's on some shit, which creates this weird disconnect between looking at the narrative through the pre-rendered cutscenes side and looking at the narrative through the in-game written notes side. Now I know the developers take into account the fact that most players won't pay attention or even read the written notes, so they try to base their story progression off of the cutscenes. But it would have been cool to connect some dots and have a character reference a newspaper I've inspected or something. With that being said, there are a couple of plot holes that actually suffer from inconsistency, which I'll go through at the end. But I've been holding on to this disc for a while now, and it's time to finally see what's on it.
So, after careful examination, I've had come to the conclusion that she's not wearing no panties, man, look!
The tapes actually show Kenny to be alive in a cell, and reveals Herbert as the bag thief from the start of the game and the one who imprisoned him. But it also shows Mr. Walden, the biology teacher, to have set the monsters loose by accident after stumbling upon Herbert's underground labs. The group learns this and head to the janitor's office, Mr. Garrison, for assistance, only to find his dead body. His death actually happens in real time, where if you stand outside his office, you will hear his last words battling the monsters.
You freaky little bastards are not getting out of here that easy. Come here!
And if you get too close, he'll cry in agony as he is killed. But in my opinion, Mr. Garrison has to be somewhat involved in all of this. First of all, he possesses a loaded shotgun in his office, while carrying a handgun as if he's ready for a possible invasion. And moreover, he's got access to the school's surveillance system in his office room, so it's difficult to assume that he couldn't have witnessed anything. And he looks like the grown-up version of the kid from Bully, so...
It's not looking good, Bev. It's not looking good.
Leaving Mr. Garrison's corpse behind and heading deep through the cafeteria, the group finds Elizabeth, also known as Miss Wixen, who's locked inside the infirmary. And since she plays a big role in the whole experiment, she's aware of the monster's weakness to light, and will not open the door unless the power comes back on.
Who is it? I'm not opening up until the lights are back on.
So I've tied some wires up and bounced back to get some info out of Elizabeth. Now, I would love to tell you what they are talking about here, but for some reason the dialogue's audio in this game keeps getting out of sync, where the characters start getting rude and talk over each other.
It's me, Miss Wixen. We're looking for our friend Kenny. You don't know where he is, do you?
Kenny. Oh, another one.
What do you mean,
Kenny?
another one?
Herbert?
Herbert? The maniac who kidnapped Kenny?
Hey, John.
Leonard.
Who's
Yeah?
Leonard?
You got an extra flashlight?
You mean flashlight?
She's lost her mind.
No, I have no idea what's causing this shit, but I've watched multiple playthroughs of the game on YouTube, and they all seem to have the same problem. Maybe it's like hardware acceleration, where modern systems are too good for this game. But I don't know, and Elizabeth don't know nothing either. It seems like she's in shock and just keeps talking gibberish about her husband Leonard and his brother Herbert. The group runs into Mr. Walden, who's unbeknownst to the students is infected with the mortophilia spores. But he still hands them out the auditorium keys, which will be the next destination. Traversing through the amphitheater... Yeah, I'm not sure about this one. Anyways, the students find a projector, which they use to play a film reel. This film shows their principal, Herbert, injecting himself with the anti-aging serum. But there is a small insinuation in this movie, because at the start, it shows a helpless victim that is presumably used as a guinea pig, and then showing Herbert injecting himself, which implies that Herbert's using the serum on himself with a preconceived knowledge on how it works. Of course, this knowledge is gained by trying the serum on other test subjects. But what happens when the serum is administered without this knowledge? I mean, Herbert and Miss Wixen's age showcase the intended results of the anti-aging serum. But on the other side, the rampant monsters running around the campus are a living example of the serum's failure. What causes this failure is exposure to the sunlight during the mutation process, where direct exposure damages the strained tissues and causes the initial mutation. Initial is the key word here, since depending on how much light radiation the subject is exposed to afterwards will determine how advanced his transformation would get. To put this in simpler terms, take a look at the monsters above the ground. Their evolution is significantly hindered by the various light sources they are subjected to. in contrast to the ones living in the underground labs, where light is almost non-existent. It's clear that they have reached an atrocious state of evolution. But what's really freaky is that these so-called homemade arbres are considered baby toys in comparison to Leonard's state. Leonard Friedman was the first to try out the serum, and with no tangible information on how it works, he got himself exposed to sunlight, which immediately started his mutation process. But that was in 1903, 100 years ago. It's almost unimaginable to perceive the state he is in now. And so to get an idea, the students take an elevator shaft ladder straight down to the underground tunnels. Oh, and by the way, this elevator has a safety mechanism that, if left unchecked, the elevator will collapse and crush down who's ever assigned to player 2. Thought I'd mention this since I love these wacky Final Destination type of deaths. Moving on to the tunnels, this is where shit starts to get real. Hey buddy, you're okay?
Your little pussy belongs to me. You're gonna learn to do what I fucked with.
So the group reunites with Kenny behind bars, whereas a metal hook is conveniently placed under one of the beds. And after they use it to escape, they hit to see Miss Wixen, but she's dead as well. So they decide to follow up a tip left by a student back in 1969 that leads them to the closed down dormitories.
Help me.
Stan? Running around the dormitories, the group finds Alan Gardner's diary. Once a student back in 1969, Alan's research on the disappearances provide a lot of information that connects the final dots. So, the unedited final version of the story in a nutshell is as follows. The Friedman brothers discover the mortiphilia plant and its life-prolonging properties. They try to introduce their findings to the scientific community but fail. The twins go rogue and build an underground laboratory disguised as a college, which would give them access to students who they use as guinea pigs. The student test subjects seem to handle the serum well. That is because they are trapped underground with no sunlight to relapse the mutation process. One of the twins, Leonard, who is desperate to prove his work to the public, looks at the results and decides to inject himself with the anti-aging serum. But he makes the mistake of stepping into the sun and things go south for him. His brother Herbert starts experimenting on the students double time, in hopes of finding a cure that would reverse Leonard's mutation. The Office of Technology inside the Congress gets a hold of the twins' sketchy schemes and unanimously decide to confiscate their equipment and close down their college. The Delta Theta Gamma Brotherhood steps in with its deep governmental ties and aids Herbert in covering up whatever sick experiments he has going on. And so Herbert resumes his mission to find a cure for his brother Leonard, but realizes he's getting old and running out of time, so he injects himself and his sister-in-law Elizabeth Wixen with the anti-aging serum. Of course, the catch is, don't get exposed to sunlight, and it's hinted at in the prologue cutscene of the game, where Herbert is standing just shy of the sun ray with his hands tied behind his back.
Yes, take advantage of the sunshine while it lasts.
Now, the attention the college has gotten due to the number of the disappearance cases is massive. And so, in 1960, Herbert diverts that attention by rebranding it as a high school. 1969, Alan Gardner is aware of the scrutiny and leaves documents that would convict everyone involved. But he wasn't able to publish any of them since he was caught by Herbert lurking around in the underground labs, while Herbert gets to stay on the loose. Things keep rolling until the present day, where Alan Gardner's discoveries led the 5 students to Leonard's location in the underground labs, specifically under the school's gymnasium, where the game started and where it's about to end. Now, Mr. Walden, the biology teacher, who's obviously been infected, catches Herbert with an antidote. Of course, Herbert is intending to use it on his brother Leonard, but Walden shoots Herbert and tries to use the antidote on himself. But a transfigured Leonard is not letting it slide, which brings the game to the final boss battle of Leonard. His fight is pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it, and his death will initiate the game's final cutscene. And depending on the survival of the 5 members, the game will prompt a different one, where if all 5 remain alive, the game will show them reconciling each other, while if one or more of the members dies, the game will show the victim's memorial. So with the conclusion of the narrative out of the way, there are some pretty cool discoveries to be found late game. Things like the mortophilia infection resembling a real-life disease called xeroderma pigmentosum, which is characterized by severe photosensitivity, skin color changes, and uncontrollable tumor developments. The game also integrates a ton of details surrounding the mortophilia infection, covering aspects such as how it works, but the constant usage of medical terminologies makes it a bit confusing to try and decipher how accurate the description is. But what's more comprehensible is the different forms of mutations, where sometimes the subject comes into contact with foreign bodies like a fly or a type of amoeba, which can merge the two into a grotesque body of flesh, like this queen monster. Additionally, some data files managed to build some infrastructure like this audio clip which suggests that Herbert was able to give the monsters orders.
Basta! Lo quiero vivo.
This is Spanish for "that's enough, I want him alive," presumably speaking about Kenny in the game's intro. Taking all of this into consideration, there is obviously a ton of effort and detail put into the game, and although it has a lot of background lore and world building, it does run into some inconsistencies. Here, let me give you a couple of them. Okay, so Leonard injected himself with the serum in 1903 after observing its results on the other test subjects. So these test subjects were kidnapped and experimented on before 1903. But Alan Gardner's research suggests that the first disappearance was in 1904, leaving some inconsistency in the timeline. Another one is a newspaper mentioning that after the disappearance of the 16th victim, new measures have been taken by Herbert and the police department, where they closed down the dormitories. But again, Alan Gardner, who resided in these dormitories before they closed down, was able to recount 26 cases of disappearances.
26. I have now counted 26 cases of missing persons connected with the school. Strange that the police have never come up with anything about it.
Sure, the Brotherhood could have covered up 10 of them, which reduces the number back to 60, but it seems like a fetch, honestly. Don't get me wrong, these oversights do not take away from the quality of the game. If anything does, it's the replacement of the original Sum 41 soundtrack with a dull and generic one in the remastered version. It's kinda weird, but the studio behind this game is on some kind of hiatus nowadays, and haven't really released anything significant ever since Alone in the Dark in 2008. And it's a bit depressing because both of the obscure games are crafted with a ton of love and detail, and absolutely do not deserve their low review scores. Understandably, the quote-unquote wacky characters played a big part in the game's demise, and although there is some hidden depth behind them, it's hard to not judge a book by its cover. But in my opinion, these cheesy dialogues are a part of the game's charm, really, and if there was ever a new entry to the series, I won't play it unless the characters know capped and it's lit bruh all over the place. But for now, I'll hang out at the gymnasium in 2003 and wait for Kenny to miss a shot.